do Paradise Lost. How about that? Let me share my screen here. A few things before we start with today's material. If you go to, that's 1B. If you go to Google Classroom, on Tuesday, I was talking about the community scholarships that are available and that all the seniors should watch the video for that. The counseling department needs you to, after you're done watching that video, seniors, go ahead and go to the Google form. It's a really simple, like 1-minute form to indicate that you saw the video, that you're aware of the community scholarships and so on. So if you could do that, that would be good. They're gonna send me a list next week of who has signed up and who's already indicated that they've watched that, but they just want to verify that all the teachers are doing their job and getting the word out about those scholarships. We don't want people to, in April be like, where are all the scholarships? And it's over, so I kind of need to prove to them that I presented you with that opportunity. So when you get a second, go on and, Josh, you don't need to do that, but go on and just fill out that form real quick. Another thing I wanted to touch on is in Blackboard, I have, let me put on the student view. I have finished looking at anybody's discussion number 3 that still had pending parts to it. So if you were still finishing up with the replies to your classmates this weekend or whatever, I have already finished that. I've graded them all and I've logged those grades into the East Gradebook too. So originally those grades were incomplete because I was waiting, giving you some more time to finish those up after the winter storm. So if you got an incomplete on your report card, then I'm working on those grade changes today. So I'll turn them in before I go today, but you can see what the grades are in the portal if you needed to. But I'll be filling out the paperwork on those and sending them in. I think I have maybe 8 to do, and I'll be turning them in today. While we're here, we might as well talk about discussion number 4, which is the one that is due tomorrow. The post is due tomorrow. We were talking about it on Tuesday a little bit, so you can also refer back to that video where we went through and talked about it. But that one is about how Othello has qualities of humanism. How do we see humanism in that play? And how do we see psychology reflected through motivation in Othello? Those are kind of 2 separate questions. If you can see a way to dovetail them together, then that's fine. But otherwise, you can just put them in with 2 different sections. Let me check off Marcus just joined. So that one is due tomorrow. If you have questions, if you're working on it and you're not sure, feel free to email me. I think the only thing I have on my schedule tomorrow is I have an AP meeting in the morning. Other than that, I can be pretty responsive to emails tomorrow night classes. And then the replies are due on Monday. We're going to start getting back on track for that. So I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to meet those deadlines. Any questions on discussion 4? Let's do tomorrow. Hi, Marcus. All right, another thing that we have coming up is essay number 1. And I just want to show you where you can submit that. It's not due till the 21st, but you can go to this unit and it's here under the essay 1 submission. That is the one about Othello. Hopefully you have started on that. Maybe some people are leaving it until spring break, which I really try hard to make it so that you don't have to, but I understand that you might be inundated with work right now. I will respond to you over spring break if you have questions, if you decide to work on the paper in earnest during that time. It's due the Sunday, the last day of spring break before we come back on the 22nd. So if over, like maybe you're just sort of like getting your ideas together, but you're gonna actually write the paper during the week of spring break, then I think, that's up to you. But I will respond to you if you have questions or if you want me to read your thesis or look at your draft for feedback or anything like that. So feel free to send that my way. Are there any questions about that paper? I've gone over it a couple different times in a couple different class periods. It's the one where you choose a topic on Othello. Most recently, I think last week, I was talking more in detail. When we finished Othello, I was talking more in detail about the different topics. So it's okay. So if you need support with that, just let me know. You can send me an email. If you're completely lost and don't know what to do, I will get on a Zoom with you and walk you through it. Whatever you need to make sure that you can get that paper done. Very soon after paper number 1 comes in, I need to start talking to you about paper number 2, because I pushed the date back on the first paper like 2 weeks or 3 weeks. The gap between the papers is more narrow. So paper number 2 is a research paper, and that one is going to be coming up pretty quickly. It's not due till the first week of May, but you know, it's going to take more effort because it's a research paper. So I'll start talking about that very soon after paper number 1 comes in. But I'm here to support you. You don't have to do everything on your own. I know that the course is structured on Blackboard so that you can do everything on your own, but that's a choice that you can make. I'm having classes and recording everything and making myself available to help you, because I know everything's tough now and people are stressed and beyond stressed. I'm trying a lot of days to keep it together myself. So, but I'm the grown up, so I will help you with whatever you're working on. It's not an imposition to me. It's not a problem. That's what I'm here for. So if you're working on your paper, if you're working on studying for your midterm that's coming up, a discussion, what have you, you know, just reach out and send me an email or send me a message on voice. That's probably the fastest way. I have a Google Voice number that I use for school. You can just text me. It's just like texting. You can send that to me too. All right, so I want to talk about Paradise Lost today. You can find this PowerPoint. It's just a brief PowerPoint. There are a couple quotations that I wanted to talk about, and I just isolated them on this PowerPoint, but you can find them in the other materials section of the unit down here. Oh, that's good. I'm glad I went there because I wanted to remind you before we started. Hopefully you saw my message about the auto recording of Paradise Lost. It's really cool to listen to that recording because there are different character voices and there's some background sounds. It's sort of echoey because they're in this, you know, vast chaos, the demons at the beginning of the work. And there's this really good audio recording, and I put the time so that for each book you know when to start. It's a YouTube video, but there's no video, it's just audio, but it's really helpful. I find it helpful to listen. It keeps me more engaged. Plus you can speed it up a little bit according to your reading, you know, speed, and you can kind of, you know, let the voice of it keep you focused on reading as you run your eyes across the page. And that's a really good one. I think there's a couple of places in our readings where it differs a little bit what's in the audio versus what's on the page, but it's like 98% accurate to the text. So also, I was watching this really, really good video. I'm not going to assign it. I'm not going to give an assignment around it because it's not in the syllabus, but I saw this really good video called Milton's Heaven and Hell. And this guy, this Italian guy, sort of follows the life of Milton, and his especially focuses in on the time that he was writing Paradise Lost and what he was doing, what he was going through, where he was physically in the world. Like he goes to Florence when he's talking about how Milton went to Florence in order to study and learn, and you know, the different places that he went. And it's sort of interwoven with his thought process as he was writing Paradise Lost. And so it was a really cool video to watch. I recommend it. Give you a lot of good background on Paradise Lost, and we'll also talk a little bit about what happens. We're only going to read books 1 and 2, and there's a whole bunch more that happens, and he talks about that too. So it's about an hour video, but I watched it on like 1.5 playback speed, and it, you know, took me less time than that. So I really recommend that video to you, but I'm not going to make an assignment. I know that we're working on the midterm and the paper and the readings, the discussions, and so I don't want to make another another one, but that was worth it time-wise for me. A lot of other stuff on YouTube about Paradise Lost is, boring instructor lectures like mine. So it wasn't too thrilling to watch, but that one is like got some funny parts, and I don't know, they talk about angel farts and stuff. I just thought it was an interesting video, and you might find it cool if you have extra time. I know you might not. So let me go to the slideshow that I want to go through today, just to talk about the introduction to Paradise Lost, some of the important quotes, and then I'll go to the study guide and walk you through that one a little bit with some key elements. So we already talked about Paradise Lost a little bit on Tuesday because I wanted you to be ready to read it, book one, and understand that we're starting, after the fall of Satan or Lucifer and the other, the rebel angels, and we're starting as they are just sort of like waking up in this chaotic, sort of nebulous environment. But before I start talking about book one, I want to talk about these four conflicts, I guess, that are basic to the text. And you might want to jot them down because we see them over and over again, not just in these two beginning books that we'll read, because we're only reading the very beginning, sort of like the exposition of Paradise Lost, but they also do echo later on in the text. So they're pretty consistently present throughout the entire work. And the first one is the idea of a hierarchy or an order. And we talked about the great chain of being on Tuesday, and you're going to see evidence of it, or should have seen evidence of it, in Paradise Lost. We have the hierarchy of Satan as the leader there in what will become hell. It's not hell right now. They build pandemonium toward the end of book one, and that's the structure that is sort of like their meeting place and all of that. But there's a hierarchy. There's no voting for who's going to be in charge in hell. It's immediately assumed that Satan, aka Lucifer, was his angel name, is in charge. They look to him because he was the leader of the revolt against God. They revolted. We'll talk about that in the next one. So he is there. Beelzebub is his right-hand man. There are some other advisor type demons that he has, but there's a hierarchy even in hell. And we see that in heaven as well. There's an order and a structure to God and the angels and the expectations. God has created his son, and that's one of the reasons why these rebel angels have revolted. They see it as more of a monarchy or a totalitarian society than a democracy. And so they start questioning, am I a servant here? What's the situation? So then we get to the second bullet, which is disobedience. And we see that in multiple places in Paradise Lost. We see it, of course, with the angels rebelling. Satan convinced a third of God's angels to rebel against him because he said that they weren't being treated fairly, that it was a totalitarian regime, basically. And he didn't want to be a servant. And so that disobedience rolls into this, rebellion, this revolt that they end up losing. And that's the reason that they're sitting there in this chaotic hell. But we also see disobedience in the other part of Paradise Lost, because the remainder of the text that we're not going to read is Milton imagining how it is that Satan decided to go and punish God further by corrupting his creature man. And we don't get that in the Bible. We just get that Satan showed up as a serpent in the Garden of Eden and convinced Eve to eat of the tree of knowledge, and she wasn't supposed to. But this is sort of like the backstory that Milton arranges and creates the reason why. So those fallen angels don't want to just accept their fate. They want to fight back against God. As a matter of fact, they're going to debate that in book 2 before they make the decision. So the rest of the text is about how Satan and these demons plot against God and create the downfall of human beings, and are always trying to undermine God's creations. And so there's a disobedience there too. And even Adam and Eve show disobedience when they eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge. So there's this idea that, you know, we're given free will, which is the next one, but very often we choose disobedience and revolt over what God might prefer. So there's this idea of free will versus predestination throughout the text too. God gave the angels free will, obviously, because they were able to rebel. He also gave humans free will and tests them in a way to see if they will listen to him. And so there's this, how much of our life is our own choice and how much of our life is predetermined. Well, God knew that they were going to disobey him. And he knew that the angels were going to rebel against him. He already knew all of those things. So it's about giving them a chance. And of course, we see sin and innocence. There's going to be a character that we see, I think, in book 2 called Sin. And sin, okay, so there's the heaven, at this point in the text, there's heaven, which is where God is, and the remaining angels and where they had their battle. And then there's this weird sort of fiery nothing land where all of the fallen angels and Satan find themselves at the beginning of Paradise Lost. And in between is just sort of like this nebulous, well, I have it here in the background, right? I forgot I had it right here. So here is sort of like a depiction of that. It's unformed. It's not, he hasn't created Earth yet or people. That's going to come later. So it's all just this sort of weird swirling cloud, you know, environment. And sin and death are creatures that inhabit the middle space between heaven and hell. And there's gates there that make it so that all the demons can't get back out again. And, you know, God has put them there. And sin is an actual character who inhabits that area. Sin and death inhabit that area. So we'll actually see that as a character, but sin is also an action. So it's also about, you know, going against God, the original sin of eating the apple from the tree of knowledge before God said that it was okay, and all of that. So these we'll see over and over again in the text, and those are the 4 core concepts to go back to. All right, a few quotations. At the very beginning, there's a little sort of introductory section that talks about, where John Milton talks about his goal for Paradise Lost. And even though books 1 and 2, which are the only ones we're going to read, are take place in hell and is all about Satan, book 3 is where God comes out. The text is not only about Satan, but this beginning part, he says, of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe with loss of Eden, till one greater man restore us, that's Christ, and regain the blissful seat, sing heavenly muse. So he's asking for, you know, the muses, which are the mythological goddesses in charge of creativity. Sing what in me is dark, illumine. Whatever I don't understand, help me to understand so that I can create this work. So he's calling on these forces of creativity to help him write. What is low, raise, and support. And he says, I'm here to justify the ways of God to men. So to explain to man why things are the way that they are. And so this opens up, before we even get the view of fallen angels in hell, we first hear about Milton's idea for his text. So that quotation is important. Remember when I told you if I pull out a quotation and talk about it, it's probably one of the options that might show up on your midterm. So then we get into book 1, and the fallen angels, the demons, are just sort of waking up. It's like 9 days of falling and then 9 days that they're just sort of crashed out in this swirling environment that's dark and dingy, and there's a lake that's on fire, and they're sort of fallen into this lake. And they start to wake up. And so Satan and Beelzebub sort of drive themselves out of the lake. And there's some stuff on the study guide I'll point out about that in a minute. And Satan says, fallen cherub, to be weak is miserable, doing or suffering. But of this be sure, to do aught good never will be our task, but ever to do ill our sole delight, and being the contrary to his high will, whom we resist. So this is where Satan commands that from that point on, they have to shift. They're no longer in God's favor. Now they are the opposite of God. So he says, we're not going to be doing good anymore. Now our task will be ever to do ill. And not only that, but we will take delight in it. So not only will we do ill or, like misdeeds, bad things, but we will be happy about it and gleeful as we do them. And this is basic to the Christian belief system, right? The idea that no matter who you are or what you do in life, that the devil can tempt you, that you can be tempted into sinful acts at any moment in time. And so that's what John Milton's building off of, the idea that Satan, out of his revenge for what God has done to him, is going to constantly be chewing at humanity and chewing at God's creation to try to corrupt it. And will delight in doing these things because it's the only way we can get back in. And we can't get back into heaven, but we can sure make God's situation uncomfortable. And everything that he does is just going to end in corruption. So he says, if then his providence out of our evils seek to bring forth good, our labor must be to pervert that end. If God's always trying to do good things, our job is to pervert or corrupt that. He doesn't mean pervert like in a sexual way, although that's impossible. But he means to pervert just means to denigrate whatever God creates. And out of good, still to find means of evil. Even in those good things, we're going to try to reduce them to something bad. So it's sort of like the mission statement of the demons in hell. Another really famous line, or a couple lines that we see in book 1, is when Satan talks about, because they're all in pain, God, in addition to kicking them out of heaven and putting them in this, swirling wilderness, he's also made them physically in pain, which they've never experienced before, having been angels. And so Satan says the mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. In other words, no matter where you are, you can convince yourself of different circumstances, right? Like you can tell yourself in your mind and create an environment that goes against whatever environment you're really in. So we have to take this hell and make it a place where we rejoice in our deeds. Here may we reign secure, and in my choice to reign is worth ambition, though in hell. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. That's a really famous line from Paradise Lost, and it's been shifted a little bit through other revolutions in history. But it's about freedom, right? It's about, I'd rather be a peasant, but free to make my own decisions, than rich, but controlled by someone else. And so he says, I'm better off as the leader of hell than I was as a servant in heaven, which at least you got to give him credit that he followed through on his complaint, right? He told God this isn't right and was willing to fight for it. As a matter of fact, I think this is a good time to mention that a lot of scholars note that Milton made Satan way more interesting of a character than God in this text. God comes out in book 3 and he kind of just notices what's happening with them. He says some things that are kind of general and also kind of a little looking forward to the future, so a little vague. But he is not as charismatic and interesting as Satan is. And so as readers, we're like, oh, he's kind of captivating and he's got some good points. And everybody seems to be enraptured by him, well, all these demons. So there is a factor in Paradise Lost where Satan is the more developed character. Satan is the character that is the juiciest role to play if there was going to be a Paradise Lost film or stage production or something like that. He's interesting in his, you know, in his belief system, and basically he says heaven's not a democracy, and it should be. And that's his complaint. Plus, he doesn't like the fact that God created his son and gave his son his right hand position. But that's it for these quotes. Any questions so far? I feel like if you read the text, all of that sort of makes sense. I'm looking in the chat to see if there's anything. All right, let's go to the study guide. Maybe you want to make a copy of this for yourself if you haven't already. I will kind of go through it, and you can stop me if you have additional questions or something. This study guide is set up differently because I put a summary in the middle. It's kind of hard to read Paradise Lost. You know, it's an older text. It's very dense. There's a lot of description. There's some long passages where, especially in book 2, the different, you know, fallen angels are debating what they should do. So there's a lot to unravel. And so I decided that a summary study guide would probably be better. And then over here, you can put in some keywords and things like that from the passage, things that I might mention as I go through the study guide. You can make some notes on that too, because there's a certain amount of this text that is about, you know, the story of the fall of man and the fall of Lucifer and the angels and the fallen angels, but there's also a bigger context and some points that Milton was trying to make about society at the time. And I want to bring those up because just reading it isn't going to bring those up to you. So I'll mention those as we go too. So I already talked about the first section of before book 1, but it's about, you know, how he's going to discuss the fall of Adam and Eve and how the root of that isn't in the Garden of Eden. The root of that is in the fall of these angels. So the Bible doesn't do that. The Bible starts with the Garden of Eden and the creation of earth. And Milton's saying, yeah, but it goes back. How do you have a Satan if you don't talk about the fall? So like, how does the serpent show up in the Garden of Eden? It just sort of does in the Bible. And so he goes back a step farther and says, but really it all stems from what happened to Satan and his vengeance and why he wants to take the form of that snake and corrupt the human beings. So it's about humanity and our current, you know, current situation as humans, because of the fall of man, we have to suffer things like childbirth, and we have to have jobs, and everything isn't in abundance for us, just given to us. We have to labor and all of that sort of thing. So there's this side of the text that he's talking about, that it's the act of eating the apple that is the rebellion of human beings, but that was forced by the fall of Lucifer. So then you have a part where it's talking about the muse. For Milton, for ancient texts, the muse, you know, I'm just going to put in some notes here. Hopefully you can follow along. For ancient works, the muses were goddesses, and every writer would start off by acknowledging them because the muses were goddesses in charge of creativity. But for Milton, because he's writing a Christian text, you know, rooted in the Christian tradition, his muse is the Holy Spirit, he says. And he says it's the voice of God that will help him to explain the creation of the universe and is his inspiration for writing about what happened to cause this fall. I should probably put my glasses on. So I highlighted that place there in the notes. Okay, so then in the text, there are two acts of disobedience. I've already talked about them. One is the disobedience of Lucifer and the other rebel angels, trying to usurp God and his power. And then the other one is the disobedience of Adam and Eve, when God told them not to eat of the tree of knowledge, the fruit of the tree of knowledge. So in a way, there is this, they're interrelated. The creature versus the creator. God created the angels, God created the humans, and both of them are interrelated because the whole reason that Adam and Eve fall is because Satan fell. So that explains that. This next part is where we were talking about in media res, right? In the middle of things. We see Satan is dazed and he's sort of like waking up from this 9-day slumber because they got slammed into this abyss. And so it's about him sort of crawling out and talking. He's waking up, he's talking to Beelzebub. And so we have this focus on the antagonist. Satan is the antagonist in the text, but in the exposition, we have mainly Satan. So the question is he, I don't know, there's always this eternal question, is Satan the protagonist in this tale? It doesn't mean that he has to be good, but do we follow the actions of Satan or do we follow the actions of God? We're not reading the whole thing, but I'll tell you right now, we follow the actions of Satan more in the beginning. And then as the text goes on toward the middle, there's more following the story arc of God. I think tyranny is an important word here, so I'm going to highlight it. All right. Bye, Marcus. Don't forget to watch the rest on video. Okay. So it's important to note that throughout his little speech, because Satan starts to wake up and he starts to call to the other fallen angels and stuff like that. And it's important to note that he sees God as a tyrant. Now that's an intriguing and different view of God than most people learn about in Sunday school. And it's Old Testament God, right? And I can kind of see, even though, you know, my religious background has a more God-centered view, I can see how you might think that God is a tyrant. I mean, it's God's way or no way. And maybe the angels didn't all accept that. And I can kind of see sort of how it might be in their thoughts to rebel, and they might see God as a tyrant telling them what to do and making them do his bidding and so on and so forth. He's talking with Beelzebub at this point in time. So this is where we get into the idea of the great chain of being, right? Which we talked about on Tuesday. How God is in control and how he's going to make them live forever in pain and exile because he has the end of the chain. He has the control over everything that it touches. And it talks about you know, they don't have an opportunity to go back, but they do have an opportunity where they can make it difficult for God to have everything in his perfect heaven. There's a long section after that that describes Satan, because he starts pulling himself out of the lake and standing up and, you know, kind of like stretching out. And they talk about his body. There's a lot of really rich language, some hyperbole. You know, they're there in this liquid fire and they walk up and it describes the muscles that are rippling on Satan and all that stuff as they sort of shake off the sleepy attitude, because they've been in this sort of state, but also, you know, physically whatever dust and water and nastiness that's been on them in the lake, and they sort of come out of there and they do it on their own power, even though it's painful for them. And there's a long description of that. And then Satan starts to call all of the legions to come. They start to go to this spot that's on a mountaintop there in heaven. I don't know if this is supposed to be it or not, but you know, they sort of fly up there, and Satan starts talking about how desolate the location is. There's the word desolation right here. And he says, well, this is where he says it's better to serve in hell. I mean, it's better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. Like, this is a crappy location, but at least we're in charge of it, right? So the power is now theirs. So we can create what we want out of this nothingness kind of thing. So he gets this armor and he gets himself together and he calls to what they call the legions, to all of these fallen angels. It was the third of the angels that God had in heaven. He commanded quite a big army. And so these what we call epic similes that describe you know, how they're flying toward him and how they're pulling themselves from the lake. An epic simile is just a long extended simile. And they've all had their names erased in heaven, so they all start to talk about the new names that they want to have. So there are these name changes because God has erased them from the books and the records in heaven, and so they all get new names and they start talking about what names they want to take. And some of them want names from, you know, ancient Egypt, gods from different cultures. You know, Satan changes to Satan from Lucifer, and they all start talking about their names that they're going to take, which are all pagan sort of devil names, because if they're pagan, then they're not with God. It talks about Moloch and Belial and how they chose their names from these, you know, horrible gods in mythology. And even though they're sad that they have lost the war with God, the fallen angels and the demons are at least look to Satan as a form of, you know, like hope and guidance. Because they're never going to be let back into heaven after the rebellion, and they know that. But instead of having a bleak existence because they're immortal, they look to Satan to say, okay, what next? What are we going to do? How are we going to make this into a place for us? Are we going to fight back against God, or are we just going to accept our place here in this hell? What are we going to do? And actually that isn't really resolved until the next book, because they have debates and they get up and talk about what are the benefits and drawbacks of trying to fight against God further. What are the benefits and drawbacks of just living here and, you know, making the best of it? So Satan starts to speak to them, and he does not use the name of God. It says right here, where did I put that? He doesn't use the name of God. He uses the name of like Heavenly Creator. He says stuff like that, and he doesn't really want to use the name of God. Because he's so angry. So the angels in this part toward the end of book 1, the fallen angels, I'm just going to call them demons from here on out, start digging. And they find some different minerals and stuff like that, which is all, you know, to show vanity. But they start building pandemonium. Which is sort of like their meeting place. It's their mead hall. It's their location. It's made, there's golden seats in it, and they construct, it's like a temple, really. And they construct this building pandemonium. Now we use the word pandemonium sometimes, right? Like, you know, all my cousins came over at Christmas and it was pandemonium. I don't think we mean it this way, but that's where the word comes from, you know, like where all of the demons are trying to come together. And in pandemonium, they have arguments and they have debates about what they should do. And so it's lively and argumentative and all of that. So I think I should also note that Milton meant this as a parody of the churches, the ornate churches. So the building that these demons create is, the way they do it is kind of magical, like they command the things to move together and whatnot. But it's a parody of Milton's own society, who was building cathedrals and stuff like that. And it's very expensive, all the artwork that goes into that and the architecture. And he's kind of pointing out they make this grand spot, but they're demons in hell with no value. So he's kind of saying, why are we building these cathedrals? Like in real life, why are we building all these cathedrals and spending tons and tons of money when there's people starving? You know, like what are really the good works of Christianity if we're going to spend our money on this big temple and not take care of the people that need it, kind of thing. So it's a little bit of a satire or a parody of Milton's own society in that way. Now, book 1 ends on a cliffhanger. Because at the end of book 1, pandemonium is finished and all of the demons sort of like go and find their seats in the arena that they have. And they are waiting for Satan to speak. The purpose of the next part is for them to debate what's going to happen next. And there'll be a number of different voices. Ultimately, Satan will have the decision, but it's kind of like a fake parliament, right? Or a Congress, where they're all voicing their opinions, and then ultimately there'll be a vote, except Satan's the one who's going to sort of decide. And he's going to pull them in book 2 to see, do they think that they should continue fighting against God, like find other ways to fight him, or do they think that they should just hang it up and accept that they could never defeat him and just live in their existence, like take the loss and just suck it up? And that's what is leading into book 2. So we're not really sure how that's going to play out until they have their debates in book 2. All right, I know that I was going into a lot of detail about that, but hopefully if you read it, if there were what I'm always hoping is that if there were little spaces in your reading that when you come to class and I go over this stuff, it's almost like I'm hoping that you're connecting things up and you're saying, oh yeah, I remember reading that. I see how that goes now. I see how that works. And hopefully I'm doing enough of that for you. Are there any questions about book one that I didn't touch on? Any lines that were confusing or anything like that?